Okay, so the next speaker is Hiromi Miyagi Lusthaus, and she's speaking about Japanese attitudes towards Jews during and after the Russo-Japanese War.
Hi, my name is Hiromi Lusthaus. It's a really lengthy name. Hiromi is my first name. Miyagi is my Okinawan Japanese name. And Lusthaus is my husband's Viennese Jewish name. And I usually normally teach Japanese language and culture in the Department of the World Language and Literature. I have been presenting my papers at the academic conferences, but they are all related to Japanese language pedagogy. So, but I happen to receive a master's degree in Jewish education. Yeah, and anti-Semitism in Japan has been my great interest. But since this is my first time since I left graduate school to present about the non-Japanese language pedagogy paper. And so, could you please bear with me my rather rudimentary presentation and also very rudimentary PowerPoint slide. Okay. So first of all, a caveat. The title of this presentation should be, Thanks.
Yes, just the arrow is fine, the down arrow.
Okay. So the title of this presentation should be actually the impact of Russo-Japanese War in anti-Semitism in Japan. Yeah, and so some people might wonder why Japan, where there has never been a significant presence of Jews, and unlike nearby Korea, the Japanese population of Christians have been about 1%, has a problem with anti-Semitism. However, anti-Semitism certainly exists in Japan. And this is actually the photo which was taken about 20 years ago at the Kinokuniya bookstore, which is not the major bookstore in Shinjuku. And so this is kind of sort of the Jewish section. And one of them, you can see that the book about Chigunes Bihara, who is called as a Shinro in Japan. But this is like a tactics of Japan and Jews controlling the world, that kind of stuff. So, there are famous incidents such as the Marco Polo incident. This is this one. So in 1995, Marco Polo, which was published by the Bunge Shunju, a Japanese monthly magazine, published an issue including an article titled "The Post-War World's Greatest Taboo: The Nazi Gas Chamber Never Existed." And of course, it really attracted a lot of criticism, but the publisher refused to apologize or retract it after initial protest, and it became a widely known in the U.S. And eventually, the publisher discontinued this magazine. And one more thing, Takasu Katsuya, blatant anti-Semitic tweet. Takasu Katsuya is a famous and very successful and influential plastic surgeon in Japan. And he has been tweeting blatant anti-Semitic comments on Twitter. Now it's X. Despite the fact he was severely criticized by the Simon Wiesenthal Center. Actually, Simon Wiesenthal Center, this guy was a member of the American Association of Plastic Surgeons. And actually, because of Simon Wiesenthal's Center's pressure, they expelled him from the membership. But still, he's still doing, he's still spewing this stuff. And this one is that, what he said was, this is Takasu, and apparently this is his, advisor, Dr. Kuroki. What he said was, I met Dr. Kuroki, who is an emeritus professor at Yale University. He told me how great the Nazism is. Yeah, but this kind of tweet, in this country, or even in Germany or other European countries, as soon as it began, then I think this guy will be expelled. But in Japan, states, I used to be a very, very active in combating anti-Semitism in the Japanese tweet and Twitters, but didn't go anywhere. He still stayed in spirit. Yeah. And then, so I would like to go that, I cannot stop once I start talking about the recent cases of anti-Semitism in Japan. But in this presentation, I would like to add that the Russo-Japanese War as a turning point for the anti-Semitism in Japan. So, but there's a uniqueness of Japanese anti-Semitism, and so since the Japanese had hardly any encounters with Westerners until 1854, and the Jewish community there has been very small, and several Jews have been perplexed by the anti-Semitism in Japan. In his research paper titled on Ignorance, Respect and Suspicion, current Japanese attitudes toward Jews, an Israeli historian and the psychologist Rosen Corner, who received a PhD from Tsukuba University in Japan, presented 7 differences between typical anti-Semitism in other nations and the Japanese version. So the first one is, since approximately 1,000 Jews live in Japan, and the Japanese do not or cannot differentiate between Jews and Westerners, so white people, right? And so it's impossible to say the Japanese anti-Semitism has been evolved from their encounters with Jews. 2. Anti-Semitism in Japan started only in the 20th century, so it's not deep-rooted like anti-Semitism in Europe. 3. Since Judaism has never involved any sort of theological conflict with any leading religious practices in Japan, the Japanese anti-Semitism has no religious root. 4. 5. Unlike Arab countries, anti-Semitism in Japan did not develop from any significant conflict with Israel. Actually, nowadays, it's becoming, unfortunately, what's happening in Gaza, it's kind of becoming that norm now. 6. Japanese anti-Semitism has never had any popular support, especially by the lower class of the society. 7. Anti-Semitism in Japan almost exclusively surfaced in written forms, and it has never caused by any material or physical threat to Jews. Mainly, various sects of Buddhism and Shinto, and Christianity has never gained a vast popularity in Japan, and so it's 1%. So then, thus, according to Kona, it seems there is no particular reason that accounts for the sprouting of anti-Semitism in Japan. However, the lack of characteristics mentioned before still did not prevent several waves of anti-Semitism from arising during the 19th century. It's therefore necessary to explore the historical background of Japanese anti-Semitism. So there's no exact date known when Jews arrived in Japan for the first time. By the late 1860s, there were about 50 Jewish families in Yokohama, and the main port of Japan, close to Tokyo. Jews hardly left any impression to local populations. From a Japanese point of view, they are just a part of Ijin, means different people, means foreigner, in Japan. And indeed, at first Judaism was thought as a sect of Christianity. Since the Meiji Restoration in 1868, the new Japanese government engaged in modernizing Japan akin to the West. And it hired a number of Westerners to educate Japanese youth, and also started sending students to Western countries. After Western countries forced the Japanese government to lift the ban on Christianity in 1873, a number of missionaries arrived in Japan. And while missionarizing, they built schools and they introduced the most sophisticated education available in Japan. This opportunity of education was more appealing than theology, and by 1880, there were 30,000 Japanese Christians, and in a couple of years, the number had tripled. And Christianity formed a compelling intellectual force in the late 19th century Japan. And despite the exposure of the new Japanese Christians to traditional, like negative Christian stereotypes of Jews, like legalistic Pharisees, intransigent infidels, and Christ killers, these did not affect the Japanese Christians' attitude towards Jews directly, and let alone non-Christians. And interestingly, some Japanese Christian leaders started forming a theory that both Japanese and Jews shared common ancestry. It's called the Nishi Dosoran, Nichi Dosoran. And some people thought that, we both Jews and the Japanese are there. one of the lost tribes or something. Yeah, yeah. And there are still some people in the current Japan who still say that. So, but this quote-unquote theory was not supported by any concrete proof, and those believers found accent into far-fetched similarities between the Japanese and Jews. In sum, this theory was not more than wishful thinking. So when the Western literature started to be introduced in Japan, Japanese translators had to rely heavily on foreign sources, such as dictionaries, to make some sense of unknown concepts, such as Jew. So many of those dictionaries define the word Jew in derogatory manners. This is, for example, the concise Oxford Dictionary of Japan English. So define the word Jew as person of Hebrew race, extortionate usurer, and a trader who drives hard bargains. Yeah, that's very derogatory. Yeah, yeah. And unfortunately, this influenced the Japanese concept of Jews. The first literature which influenced the Japanese populace was, of course, the Merchant of Venice. Yeah, yeah. And it was originally translated under the title Jinniku Shitire Saidan. It sounds really, it's really, Jinniku Shitire Saidan sounds really, it's too much for me. Vulgarness is just too much. But anyway, so then, this was first adopted for the stage in 1885, and it became an instant hit. And like Western society, and it profoundly affected Japanese depiction of Jews, which was represented by Shiloh, a stereotype of Jews in the West. So then, the Russo-Japanese War served as a stage to Jews and Japanese, two people geographically isolated up to that point, enter a more prominent space in the Japanese consciousness. First, let me mention the condition of Russian Jews during the late 19th century. Tsar Alexander II had a relatively progressive policies permitting Jews to move to Russian cities and encourage them to learn Russian language and integrate into the Russian society as well as in economy. Okay. However, once Alexander II was assassinated in 1881, pretty much the new Tsar just pretty much rescinded what his father's policy, and then something called the pogrom, as it's known, had happened, and there are so many people in so many places, and pogrom is really kind of violent attack in Jews. And the pogrom had a profound effect in Jewish history. And between 1881 and 1917, some 2 million Jews left for the Russian, for the U.S. And then Ottoman Palestine. Okay, and this pride of the Russian Jews was well known to Jews in the West. And a significant number of Russian Jews served in the Russian army. But the conflict between Russia and Japan over the territorial claim in northern China for the Russo-Japanese War. But at first, Japan was not expected to win the war, considering the vastness of Russia, huge army, Romanov family connections, and enormous resources. So Japan desperately needed the funding, to continue the war, and dispatched a diplomat in London to borrow the money. But it didn't seem successful until Jacob H. Schiff comes up. He is a German-American Jewish banker, and he offered handing eventually loaned nearly $200 million to Japanese government. So apparently, then the war ended with Japan's victory and raised the international status of Japan significantly, and the Schiff became a hero in Japan. So he visited in Japan in March 1906, and he was showered dozens of honors. And especially, he got the unprecedented invitation from Emperor Meiji to a luncheon at the Imperial Palace. And he was also awarded the Order of the Rising Sun, which had never been given to any foreigners. So this case only remains as the only time in Japanese history that the individual Jews was praised to such an extent by Japan as a nation. However, in a way, double-edged sword. It bolstered the Japanese image of Jews as rich and powerful, But once anti-Semitism was formally introduced in Japan, this image was easily flipped towards the negative side. Okay, unfortunately, shifts in support indirectly helped the introduction of the spread of one of the most anti-Semitic pieces of literature in modern history, the Protocol of Elders Society. So the Russian defeat and then weakened Roman monarchy, and then World War, and then success of the Russian Revolution. And Japan was geographically close to Russia and a nation with its own absolute monarch, and then they found that Japanese government found the situation terribly critical. So they decided to send its army to Siberia under plan to fight together with the White Russian army against the Bolshevik revolutionaries. But then, what happened is, so Protocol of Elders of Zion, Protocol of Elders of Zion, unfortunately, was passed from that white Russian army and soldiers to Japanese soldiers, and so then unfortunately it's really some people there is one guy in that army who is actually his name is Higuchi Yunosuke, who spent 39 months in Siberia. He graduated from the Russian Orthodox Nikolai Seminary in Tokyo and studied a theological seminary in St. Petersburg. So he is very conversant in Russian, and then like people like Higuchi, so proficient in Russian, they could communicate with white Russians and read the original version of the protocol. As a result, they adopted Russian anti-Semitism as their own. So then, since I don't have time, yes. Okay. Then after the war, so anti-Semitism eventually fascism gained power in Germany, Italy, and Japan. And the World War II started by not Japanese invention to Bohemia, Moravia in March 1939, and September 1940, there's the access on power at home. And by the beginning of the World War II, anti-Semitism in Japan has become a vital part of the ultra-nationalist rhetoric. The following writing represents the topic rhetoric. Quote, the Jews were but the curse of the mankind. Under the guise of democracy, they wield plutocratic hegemony in the United States. American democracy has become a Jewish den. And then, even though that propaganda was harsh, but anti-Semitism was not used to prosecute every Jew or something. And that's a difference, great difference, significant difference between Nazi Germany's attitude towards Jews and Japan's attitude towards the Jews. And Japan needed a scapegoat to help its wartime propaganda, but Japan had hardly any intention to hound every single Jew literally. On the contrary, example, Fugu Plan. So Fugu Plan is devised by Japanese military leaders and the industrialists in 1934. Initial goal was to invite 50,000 German Jews to settle in Manchuria. Yeah, because of Japan already created the Manchuria, but this didn't go anywhere. But there was a plan. So, but then, still, nevertheless, it certainly affected how the Japanese views the war, and the Japanese government used this anti-Semitism to quiet the dissensions on the home front and implement ideological conformity. Okay. Yeah, and my conclusion is pretty much, as I said earlier, the arrival of the protocols and elders of Zion in Japan made a significant contribution of shaping anti-Semitism in Japan, and it happened after the Russo-Japanese War. However, the war was the first time in history that Japanese awareness of Jews took root, and together with Japanese exposure to the quote-unquote powerful Jews such as Jacob Shea, become an important factor of the growth of Japanese anti-Semitism. Thank you.